The New Orleans Pelicans were supposed to be next. A ton of young talent and future draft picks, a superstar in the making in Zion Williamson. They had arguably the brightest future in the entire league just a few seasons ago. What the Oklahoma City Thunder have been this season, that's what a lot of people thought the Pelicans would become, and it just hasn't happened. 42 wins 2 seasons ago, 49 wins last season before Zion got hurt and they lost in the playoffs, all leading to this year. The most anticipated Pelican season in recent memory. They added DeJounte Murray in the offseason to a starting lineup that looked like it could contend for a top 6 seed in the Western Conference, and from that moment on, pretty much everything went wrong. Murray was hurt to start the year, as was basically the entire roster. Then once he came back, he tore his Achilles. Zion has barely played, and now they have one of the worst records in the entire league and absolutely no direction for their future. Brandon Ingram is gone. Zion has played less than 30 games once again. Their two best guards are either older or tore their Achilles or both, and they have truly no idea where to go from here. But that is all about to change. Not that long from now, the Pelicans will finally get the answer to the question, where do we go from here? But there are a bunch of problems that the Pelicans need to figure out. Problem number one is absolutely, and really has been for the last couple of seasons, Zion Williamson. Until they figure out what to do with him, what his future is with the franchise, that is holding up all of their other plans. If you keep him, you would like to try and build around him, despite the fact that he never plays, despite the fact that he's hurt all the time, despite the fact that maybe you're constantly concerned about him being out of shape. When he's right, when he's healthy, which he hasn't been for most of his NBA career, but when he is, the advanced numbers are unbelievable, and it's clear that he has superstar potential. And for a team like New Orleans that has some nice pieces, but nothing really concrete to build around, healthy Zion is still a very promising prospect for the future of this team. But if you don't want to continue to deal with the Zion roller coaster, and I wouldn't blame them, then you can try and trade him. But the question is, for what? At this point, you would be selling very low on Zion's value around the league if you could even find anything of value to trade him for in the first place. His contract is also very weird, which I went in depth on in a video a couple of months ago. I'll put that up here if you guys want to check that out. There's a lot of different things that they can do with his contract due to the injury issues that he's had. But first and foremost, they have to figure out what the future of Zion is with the Pelicans before they can do anything else. Problem number two is the guards. CJ McCollum and DeJounte Murray are in a very weird place within the rest of this Pelicans roster. McCollum has been there for a couple of seasons, continues to put up his numbers, but the question of whether that's the guy you want to lead your team into the future is certainly there. He's getting older and he is a 2026 free agent. DeJounte Murray, on the other hand, is hurt. He suffered the torn Achilles, which is devastating to him in his career. His future is really unknown, and he also has a player option in 2027. And the question right now is, do you keep them or do you trade them? If you were to try and trade them, do they have any value? I would assume that right now DeJounte Murray does not have any trade value, despite the fact that they did have to trade away draft picks to get him last offseason just because of the torn Achilles. They're going to have to keep him. He's going to have to rehab that, and they're going to have to try and figure it out. McCollum, on the other hand, I could see maybe a little bit of value for some teams around the league, especially because he is a 2026 free agent. And if the Pelicans wanted to try and move him, get some value, and solidify their guard positions in the offseason and free agency or through some other trades, maybe try and get younger. It's ironic they traded away Dyson Daniels, who would have been a perfect fit on this roster, but still, you could have DeJounte Murray. Hopefully he recovers well from his Achilles, maybe something with the draft, which we're going to talk about here coming up, and then maybe get some value out of McCollum. But the problem with that is they don't really have any other promising guards. You look up and down the roster, there's not a whole lot to like in the backcourt. They really were relying on McCollum and Murray, and that's one of the main reasons, apart from the Zion stuff, that they just have not been as good this year. So to get rid of one of those guys would be a huge risk that you're going to be able to get someone that can kind of replace them, whether it be now or into the future. Problem number three is very similar to what we just talked about, but it is a question of what are the core pieces in New Orleans? If you're sitting down looking at the roster and saying, what are we building around? What do we hope is on this team? Who do we hope is on this team when we are eventually good? The answer to that is definitely a question mark. Right now, I'm confident that Trey Murphy is awesome and is going to continue to be awesome. He's a guy that I want. Herb Jones, awesome, going to continue to be awesome, especially defensively. He's a guy that I want. The rookie, Missy, he's someone that I absolutely want, someone that I could see playing the 5 for them for a long time. Apart from that, the question, of course, is whether Zion is a core piece, which we talked about in the first section. Someone like Jordan Hawkins, as a recent draft pick, has not had a very good season. Apart from those three guys, Murphy, Jones, Missy, and then maybe Zion, what are the core pieces? Who do you want to build around? And it's shocking that they're that limited in terms of who their core pieces would be, be, given all of the assets that they've had over the last couple of seasons. Think about the guys that have come in and out of New Orleans over the last couple of years. Dyson Daniels thriving in Atlanta. Lonzo, who was really good in Chicago before getting hurt and is now back. Brandon Ingram, who is now elsewhere in Toronto. They continue to lose out on assets. They continue to miss on draft picks over the years, and ultimately they found themselves in a situation that seemed impossible just a couple of years ago, not just not having a direction from a Zion perspective because of the injury stuff, but more shockingly, not having a direction in terms of core pieces given how many of the assets that they had just a couple of years ago. So if you can answer all those questions, the question then becomes, now what? If you haven't answered all three of those, then what do they do? Well, to me, everything about the future of the Pelicans depends on what's going to happen with the draft lottery in a few months. Right now, one of the things that is completely saving this entire situation for New Orleans is that they have their own draft pick. It's been a disaster season, a ton of injuries, but they have full control over their 2025 pick, and this is a really talented 2025 draft class, and they have a really good chance at a top 3 pick, and any of the guys they could pick in the top 3, maybe even top 4, would be extremely impactful on this Pelicans roster. Of course, the dream scenario is to get the first overall pick and end up with someone like Cooper Flagg, which gives you a ton of different options. You could trade away Zion and build around Cooper Flagg as your focal point guy. Then you've got Trey Murphy, you've got Herb Jones, you've got Missy. Those are your 4 guys you're building around. And at that point, you're okay getting younger at the guard spots, trading away DeJounte Murray potentially midseason if he gets healthy, trading away CJ McCollum, getting younger at those guard spots as you build around Cooper Flagg. You could also make the case that they should keep Zion in that scenario and have those 2 guys play together in the front court, which would be super interesting and intriguing. That's the dream scenario. If you get the 2nd or the 3rd pick, depending on how things shake out, maybe you could end up with someone like Dylan Harper, which would be huge for them from a guard perspective. Opens up so many roster building possibilities because then they don't really care what they do with CJ McCollum and DeJounte Murray at that point. They certainly can trade at least one of those guys. You've got Dylan Harper as a guard that can lead you into the future. Again, whether that be with or without Zion, because Zion wants to have the ball in his hands a bunch, and if you're going to build around Dylan Harper, you'd like that guy to have the ball. But again, if you get one of those 2 guys, I think it just opens up so many more possibilities, and all of the possibilities are positive. But if they don't end up with one of those 2 guys, things certainly get more and more questionable. And the other pieces in this class, whether you really like VJ Edgecombe, whether you really like someone like Ace Bailey, a bunch of other guys, they feel more like a lot of the pieces that the Pelicans have had on their roster over the last couple of seasons. That Brandon Ingram type, potentially even like that Trey Murphy type, where really, really good player, but you're not really sure where you're going if they are the core of your team. And again, if you can't figure out the Zion thing, those guys don't really help you all that much. So at that point, if they weren't to get really good draft lottery luck, if they weren't to get the 1st or the 2nd pick in the draft, I could see it as much more realistic that the Pelicans would trade away someone like Zion, potentially trade away some of these other non-core pieces, and really completely reset and rebuild this thing. And essentially all of this means that right now, the Pelicans don't know where they're going, and a lot of where they're going is going to be determined by what happens in the lottery. It's nice that they have so many options, but the amount of different directions they can go in doesn't necessarily mean that all of the options are great. And as a result, there is more on the line for this Pelicans franchise when it comes to the upcoming draft lottery than most other teams around the league, because it pretty much determines the entirety of their future. If they get Cooper Flagg, they get Dylan Harper, it suddenly becomes very clear what they should do. And if not, they're going to be continually stuck in this talent middle. Unless they have a season where it suddenly becomes healthy, which doesn't seem to be likely, they're not really going to have much of a path towards true contention in a loaded Western Conference. And at the end of the day, it's really just shocking and surprising to look at where New Orleans is now compared to where they were a couple of seasons ago when they had all these future draft picks, when they had the 1st overall pick in Zion right after trading away Anthony Davis, and what that meant for this New Orleans franchise. And obviously the biggest culprit of this is what has happened with Zion over the last couple of seasons. But when you think about all those extra draft picks they had as well, they don't really have any more extra draft picks moving forward, with the exception of a couple of Milwaukee picks that they kind of have control over, but they're sharing with other teams. They got an Indiana pick as a result of the Brandon Ingram trade that they traded to Toronto. But ultimately, it's kind of impossible to think that this is where New Orleans has ended up, given all the assets they had a couple of years ago. But the other way to think about this is, if Zion is just healthy going into the playoffs last year, maybe we're looking at this situation completely different. They're not that far removed from a 49-win season, and if Zion is healthy going into the playoffs, who knows what could have happened for them in the postseason. So it's very possible that this has just been a bad luck year for the Pelicans. They're able to turn it around. They're able to get their injury luck together. They get a really high pick, and all of a sudden they're looking at a 50-win team next year. But the history of the Pelicans over the last couple of seasons tells us that more than likely that is not going to happen. So a ton of different options for the Pelicans over the next couple of months in terms of what direction they're going to go in. They are definitely one of the most intriguing teams of the NBA offseason, and there is a ton on the line for them as we approach the draft lottery.